to close permanently. Risk management really allows organizations to attempt to prepare for the unexpected by minimizing risk and the extra costs before they happen. There are a lot of other benefits. Think about it. An effective risk management will create a safe and secure environment for all staff, all stakeholders, all employees, in our case, all students, all professors, the community surrounding us, right? Effective risk management will create that safe work environment. It also will provide protection from events that are detrimental to both the organization and its environment or its community. So effective risk management will also protect all involved people and assets from potential harm. So risk management is very important, and I would like to go through a few aspects of risk management. Almost all risk management plans will follow similar steps. They combine these steps to make up the overall risk management process, right? Number one, we have to really be able to establish the context. What kind of risk management are we talking about? Are we talking about rock climbing, the risk associated with that? Are we talking about risk associated with a pandemic like what we're facing right now? Or is it with an IT being hacked, IT system being hacked? We need to establish the context. Now, in our current discussion here, we're talking about the COVID-19 pandemic. So any risk management process that we're discussing will have to be consistent with that context of the COVID-19. And then we have to identify the risk. What is the risk here? For our purpose, the risk is a possible COVID-19 infection of our students, our professors, our staff, and those who come and go, to UC. So once we identify that this is really the risk we are dealing with, then we need to analyze the risk, right? Risk analysis is important. So what is risk analysis? We want to determine the odds that the risk will occur, as well as the consequences of the risk if that risk occurs, okay? What are the consequences? So the goal is to further understand each specific instance of risk, how it could influence the organization's projects and objectives. For our purpose, the COVID-19 pandemic is we know it's highly infectious, but the odds of transmission can be reduced significantly if we all really take the necessary and appropriate steps that the experts have come up with. That is a systematic way of managing this risk. And then, of course, depending upon, I'll talk about a few things and I'll hand over to, Steve to ask his next question. But we need then risk assessment and evaluation. We know that at the height of the pandemic, universities across the nation found it necessary to shut down the university completely, because at that time we really did not understand very well what we were facing. And so it was necessary just to shut down the university to really regroup, collect, understand this pretty well. So now we have a pretty good understanding of the COVID-19, how it transmits, or how it's transmitted from one person to another, the circumstances or conditions under which we can mitigate the transmission and the effect even of the transmission. So we are in a better position now, and that is why the university has taken steps right now to gradually somehow open the university. Now, we are fortunate in the sense that the product that we deliver, which is education, can be delivered pretty much online without actually sort of giving up a lot of the benefits of high quality education, the high quality education that UC is known for. We've gone through quite a steep learning curve over the past 4 months, right? So that we can deliver education remotely. And our students have also learned how to learn remotely. So we are all in this together, and the learning curve has been steep, but we're getting there. So this is all new. We need to constantly communicate and educate our instructors, our students, parents alike about the new methods of delivery and the new methods of learning. The next one is risk mitigation. How do we mitigate the risk? How do we lessen the impact of that risk? So during that step, or this step, organizations will assess their highest ranked risk and develop a plan to alleviate them using specific risk controls. So online classes, for example, are probably our best tool currently. Most of our classes will be delivered online with few face-to-face classes. This is a way of eliminating or mitigating the risks. Now, where we have face-to-face classes, we will observe strict social distancing rules to further mitigate the risk. And then, of course, we go to risk monitoring. Once we embark upon this, we're going to monitor the risk. Then there's a feedback loop. What did we learn? What didn't we do right that we can improve upon? What did we do right that we can learn and even enhance? And the last bit is communication and consulting. So all internal, external stakeholders should be included in every communication and consultation at each appropriate step of the risk management process. So for University of Cincinnati and the Lindner College, we are constantly updating all stakeholders in our UC community, students, staff, professors, parents, and the general public about the steps that we are taking to combat, to prevent, or to mitigate the impact of COVID-19. So basically, this is what I have for now, Steve. I know I spoke.
All right, so Charles, I'd like to ask the following question of you, and think about it in the context of risk management. There's a lot of things that happens in risk management that are, it's sort of like this notion of we're going to flip a coin and there's going to be an outcome. And so given that we're going to flip a coin, there's going to be an outcome. I don't want to live with the risk. I don't want to live with the uncertainty of not knowing whether I have to pay $100 or I'm going to get $100. So what I want to do is I want to share it. I share it and then I'm done. Then we flip the coin. Okay. And then the next semester, it's the same thing. We flip another coin. I share it before that. Okay. So I guess the question is, for effective risk management, how much of it is actually in an uncertain world where we don't really know the probabilities? We just constantly have to be learning from the environment, learning from our experiences, and then adjusting what we do. So I guess my main point here is that if we think about the model of change, what is change and adjustment and getting new information? What is the value of that in terms of managing the risks, managing the uncertainty that we have?
Yeah, that's a good question. The good thing about all these things is that a number of the things that we face, a number of the risks that we face are not very new. Most of the time, we have general ways of preparing for unforeseen events. Even in pandemic situations like this one, it's not completely unforeseen. So most of the time, what we see is that the things that we experience have occurred before. And so if we put in place plans based upon what we learned in the past, we'll be more effectively able to deal with any type of risk, even a pandemic. Because if you look at pandemics, over the past several hundred years, we've had pandemics throughout human history. Right? We've had them, and nations that have really prepared or learned from what happened to them or what happened to other nations and how they dealt with it. If we really put in place the effective systems, we are more able to deal with any risk, even a pandemic. And we can see that you look at the world right now, many nations have been able to deal with the pandemic better than other nations. And it all depends on how prepared they were, how much learning that took place. So my answer is this: a lot of the times, if we put in place some systematic, structural ways of dealing with things, most of the time we will not be completely surprised. Always there will be surprises, but we will be more able to deal with even surprises like pandemics.
Thank you, Charles. Let me turn to Michelle here. So Michelle, the contrast I want to create is like this notion of flipping a coin, right? That's very precise. And then there's this notion of there's all these balls in a box, right? Then there's the notion of a crisis. Mm-hmm. So in my mind, the flipping of the coin and the balls in the box, this is like, yeah, there's uncertainty about what the outcome is going to be, but there's something special about a crisis. So can you define what a crisis is?
Well, let me ask you, in your risk, in your example here, you talk about flipping a coin. And in that, there is the decision to pick up a coin and flip it. Right. So we're making a choice. We're saying, and when Charles was talking about rock climbing, right? Do I want to take the risk associated with possibly rock climbing or skydiving? I'm sure many of you have, participated or thought about participating in some of these activities.
No.
No. I have skydived before, and I did have to sit there and calculate to myself what those risks might be. What will happen if I jump out of this plane, I fall, my chute doesn't open, the guy attached to me is not prepared, who knows what happens, right? But I'm actively engaging in a choice to pursue something, right? So when we start making some of those differentiations between what we might consider risk management and what we would see as a crisis, or what will flow into crisis management, not every application, because there are some times where things overlap, but we might look at crises as more of this truly unexpected event, right? So this is not something that I am decisively making a choice for. This isn't if I save money or if I don't save money, what will happen? This is something that comes upon a person or an organization. And there are ways, of course, and I'll talk about those in a few minutes, that we could look at being prepared for those. But that crisis is really solely an unexpected event, not necessarily us actively engaging in the decision-making process to foresee or to accomplish some outcome on the other side.
So one of the things, so I did a little investigation into sort of the Latin root of the word crisis. And so the notion there is that a crisis is something where, yeah, from now on, you really got to change your behavior. It's like the world will never be the same because of this crisis. But what's kind of interesting is, wow, we've had a lot of crises over the last couple decades, right? We first had a housing crisis, we had a financial crisis, we had sort of a crisis of corporate governance, so in the business world, there's been a number of crises, and sure enough, they have sort of completely changed the way we think about it. So when you're thinking about crisis management, are you managing after the terrible thing has happened and you have to change the way you behave, or is it more like risk management where you're trying to do something beforehand to minimize the cost associated with the bad thing? So what is crisis management?
And yes, right? The answer is yes and yes. So you're going to see that crisis management often includes concepts or the foundation of risk management in it. When I say that crisis management, or I should say when crises come and they are that shocking, unexpected thing, then there isn't us making a pre-decision, right, about that event coming. But once the event is here, we are certainly in a place where we need to make decisions on how we move forward. And those involve us looking at the risks associated with going one direction versus the other. So just like in management in its more, I wouldn't say traditional form, right? You're going to say that management often includes planning, organization, implementation, et cetera, control. And those elements also go into crisis management, where we need to take time to actively engage our mind in thinking about what could happen, and then how we could prepare for that. When we think about pandemics, when we think about civil unrest, when we think about natural disasters, et cetera, those are not things that we're saying we want to actively, engage in to start with. They come upon us. But the ability of an organization to pull through, to sustain, and to perhaps even come out better on the other side of those types of crises will depend a lot on what type of infrastructure they've built in to their organization from a learning standpoint. Learning from the past behavior of other organizations, like Charles said, other countries and how they've responded to other crises, but also learning what works well for their employees, right? Understanding how their employees are likely to respond. How would you like your employees to respond? And a lot of this can be accomplished through training, scenario analysis, taking a good stock or account of your competencies, all of the stakeholders involved, and really getting into the gritty part of if this happened, who could we call on? How will we utilize them? What can we do for those partnerships from our part? And that really kind of is a melding of those preparatory stages and then elements like Charles was talking about with risk management.
So do you have some examples of crises where certain types of organizations did it really well and or other types of organizations did it really poorly? What differentiates somebody that responds effectively and one that doesn't respond?
Okay, so generally when we're talking about organizations and perhaps a better response versus another, you're going to find organizations that are proactive from the standpoint of kind of always having I wouldn't say necessarily a dedicated individual in their organization, because we are dealing with, we could be dealing with micro-organizations all the way up to large multinational corporations, but we need individuals in those organizations that have been primed and infused with a learning mindset, with a mindset that is actively involved in scanning their environment, right? And scanning is another discussion. But you would find organizations, for example, like Amazon, who has done very well in this current pandemic, not only because we all came to this place where we couldn't go to the store, right? And everybody's like, well, I'm going to just start ordering everything online, but they were also hit in a different way, right? That influx in people want goods, services from them, put pressure on them to have to hire other individuals. It also put them into a place where they had to be very conscious about still who they hired, and did these new individuals fit their organizational model? What would they do if these individuals didn't stay on board, or could they afford to keep everyone on board they recently hired after we went back? So you would see Amazon really starting to outline the value of these new individuals, but also doing some preparatory work for those individuals and explaining what will happen when things kind of, I would say maybe not necessarily go back to normal, right? But we find this new normal, right? So that's one organization that we can say is currently, approaching this pandemic very well. Now, we have in the past examples of organizations that have not done so well in crises. We could look back to the different financial institutions of the banking era. When we go back to the 2000s or earlier 2000s, I will refrain from necessarily naming all of those institutions, but you can, some of you, know what some of those banks are, or I would maybe go back and kind of like nudge a parent and be like, hey, what was she talking about? And have them explain that to you. But in those situations, we had a different kind of crisis. So we have this internal kind of corruption or some purposeful ignorance in there, and it kind of unfolds. But then the repercussions of not being prepared as organizations who were actively engaged in this, or who were bystanders, other financial institutions who were bystanders of this, left many in the banking industry at a loss for what to do in terms of new clients and how to serve their current clients from a financial or mortgage standpoint. And that really puts a hurt on the entire US economy. Now, however, as a result of that crisis, right, we have just like Steve is saying, we are making waves. We are using that as a learning tool, as an example to push ourselves into new practices and regulations and processes that will allow us to be more prepared. But we have to have that mindset. Every organization needs to come to this place where they say, it's not if, it's when. And I don't know what it will be, but something will happen. And this has been for a surefire statement in a lot of the research that I've looked at over a lot of industries, but specifically in the tourism industry. A lot of people take this mentality that, sure, that could happen to somebody else. That I've heard of that happening overseas, in another state, not in this little town. But we are now very clearly seeing with this pandemic specifically that it is very far reaching and that we just never know what might happen. So then you might say, well, how can I prepare for the unknown? And we can't prepare for every scenario, but what the exercise of that scanning and starting to think through what some of our possible reactions would be is not just important for the longevity of an organization, but for the health of its employees, right? Working for an organization that says, I don't want to scare you, but I want to be prepared, right? I want you to feel comfortable. I want you to know that when something happens, we as an organization are going to come together, and that we've already thought of this, that we've thought of something happening, and that you're prepared with us, and that we're here with you. So it becomes very important.
So one of the things I want to think about in terms of some of your examples, there's kind of a difference between when something happens, something that's systematic, like a pandemic. There are other examples we have. There are clearly some organizations that are going to fare better than others. Mm-hmm. Okay, but that doesn't mean they're good at crisis management, right? That means that certainly those companies that are prepared or already have capital investments, already have infrastructure created to deliver food to people that are forced to stay at home, they're going to be better off than those people that are in the business of having people come to their bars and socially interact, right? So there's going to be winners, there's going to be losers. So when there's somebody that fares fairly well in whatever the change is, that's not really effective risk management. That's not really effective crisis management, right? So it's just they got less. They were a little bit more lucky than other people, right? So the thing about crisis management, the thing about risk management is that you don't know exactly what's going to happen. Mm-hmm. Some are going to win, some are going to lose. But the organization that does crisis management, the organization that does risk management, what they say is, well, whatever happens, once we get into that situation, we have to adjust. Mm-hmm. We have to adjust quickly. We need to not say, I'm sorry, we're in the business that we were always in, and that's the business that's not doing particularly well, right? You have to adjust. So I guess I'd like to turn the conversation now when we're talking about sort of risk management, crisis management. I want to turn it to a question of, for a student going to college, facing some risk, right? We're minimizing the risk, we're managing the risk associated with the transmission of COVID-19. But you're coming to college to get an education. What are the important parts of that education in terms of their ability to manage the risk in their careers, right? If you learn one skill, it could be that the world changes and that skill's really in high demand. It could also be that the world changes and that skill's no longer needed at all. You're facing a lot of risk, right? So what do you need to do as an individual that's starting off a career in college that's going to go into business? What do you need to do to prepare yourself to be effective at risk management, effective at crisis management? Because we have a lot of risk in the world, and we have a lot of crises in the world. So what are your opinions about what students should do and what they should be looking for?
Oh,
go ahead, Charles.
You, Charles, and then I'll go after you. You got to unmute yourself.
Unmute, Charles.
Uh-oh, you're still muted.
Still muted.
Sorry.
There you go.
All right. So
first, start unmuting yourself, students. Then.
Sorry. Thank you. So I think the key word is agility. You have to be agile. You have to be able to adapt to changing circumstances, because change is going to happen.
Yes.
Change is going to happen. I think one of the best, maybe the best things you can take from a university education is the ability to reason, the ability to think. And I think that is critical. Critical reasoning is very important, because as Steve said, you don't know the world 10 years from now, 5 years from now, when you graduate from college. You don't know what is going to exist. But if you position yourself very well as somebody who can reason, somebody who is flexible, who is agile, you will see that most of the time, the same ability to reason can be applied to engineering, can be applied to finance, can be applied to management, medicine. The differences are not that big. I used to be in the medical school as the president of my medical school class, and then I said, I'm not interested in becoming a doctor. And then I switched to become an engineer. I went to engineering. got a first class, what you guys call summa cum laude, and went on to a master's in engineering. And I said, I worked as an engineer a few years. I don't like this that much. So then I switched to finance to do a PhD in finance, and I loved it, and I've stuck. You have to be agile. And you realize that the same ability to reason will be applicable to many, many different areas of your life. So many a time when things come, people who are not agile, they are also moved by fear. Fear is a very destructive force. When things like pandemics happen, the worst thing that can happen to you is to be overcome by fear. Don't be overcome by fear. By all means, take the necessary, decisions, the necessary adjustments. You have to social distance. You have to do this. Make sure you listen to the experts and do all that is necessary, but do not be overcome by fear. And you realize that you can adapt. You can really be flexible. You can change and do certain things that will enable you to overcome. And so I say university education for the students coming in, you are coming in during a very difficult time. But at the same time, if you approach this correctly, you will see that you acquire a very good education that will help you to be able to become adaptable, to be agile in the future when things don't go a certain way, because you will have already gone through a very difficult season. So you know how to change and how to adapt when difficult circumstances come in the future. Thank you.
Michelle.
And I am in full agreement with Charles. And I was about to say the exact same thing. Adaptability is key. Adaptability, and I would say within that adaptability is your ability to problem solve, right? Is this critical thinking, reflection about yourself, the situation, what you are capable of. And really, I don't want you to be thinking about what you're capable of based on what you have always done, right? We need to start thinking about what I could be capable of if I put my mind to it, what I could be capable of if I acquired this skill set or that skill set, right? I am increasing, right, my adaptability and my flexibility by learning how to work outside of my box. And so when you really work on developing those problem-solving skills, you're only increasing your ability to be adaptable. And that is what this world is going to want. You're not going to come in here and say, I had to take my first year or two or whatever in online courses. No, our online courses are going to be fantastic. You are going to love being part of UC, and you're going to use whatever you thought might have been a negative in this online environment and turn it into something that you can harness, right, as a skill set. And that is going to be fantastic for you in the future. And you may honestly be this lucky, kind of realm of individuals who has a special skill set that the couple of, classes behind you don't necessarily experience. And you will be able to exploit that and really utilize that to your advantage and success in the future. So I would say without a doubt that adaptability and your kind of thoughtful process in developing those problem-solving skills are what's going to help you significantly.
I see that Samuel has asked a question. Before we get Samuel's question, though, I just want to add sort of my perspective on this as well. So one thing that I always want students to walk away from when they come into these new situations, they're going to feel uncomfortable. You have to start feeling comfortable with being uncomfortable, because if you're not uncomfortable, then you're not learning. You're not at a place where you're learning how to adapt. So I think it's really important for you to get comfortable with it and force yourself into those situations. Because you're going to learn a lot about yourself. And this is what organizations are really interested in. Not only this adaptability will be very good for your career, but it's going to be really good for the corporations that you may work for, the organizations that you may work for, because they want the organization to be adaptable, and the organization is only as adaptable as the people that are in the organization. So let's see if what Samuel's question is. I don't think I can read it. So if maybe Melissa or Matt can relay the question, that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. So Sam asks, is it possible that another very important aspect is the desire to be a constant learner? The moment that you stop learning throughout your career, your knowledge becomes stale and makes it harder to flex in a changing environment.
Yes. So one thing I would say is we know that for corporations, that when corporations invest in one set of equipment, right, they do really poorly. When there's a boom, they do okay. When there's a recession, they do really poorly. It's the corporations that invest in flexible equipment, or they invest in human beings that are flexible, that when the boom occurs, yeah, they're doing really well. When the bust occurs, they do pretty well too, right? Because they do adjust. So I think that's a version of you got to be a constant learner. You got to be constantly updating. You constantly have to be changing, because if what I would say the value of my education was that I learned how to learn. So I didn't learn a specifics of the thing. I learned how to learn anything. I know I can learn anything. So I really don't care what the world's going to be like in 10 years. I know that I'm going to be able to figure it out, and I'm gonna do okay. So I think that's a critically important part.
I think
yeah, go ahead, Michelle.
To answer part of Samuel's question is, first of all, you're absolutely right, a constant learner. And part of our job is to teach you how to learn, right? We're not teaching what you need to know. We're teaching you how to acquire, right, certain knowledge. So we're going to teach you some of the fundamentals. So I should probably roll that back just a little. We are going to teach you some of the fundamentals. You're going to, get those core financial courses, and you're going to get those core economics courses, and some of those things they're not going to change. But what we want to be able to infuse in you is this desire to pursue knowledge and information on your own, to really understand what it means to research a topic, what it means to be a problem solver. It doesn't mean just raising your hand and saying necessarily, I will come up with a solution. That's a great start, but we want to engage you in how do you find that solution? Who do you pull on? Where should I look? And maybe even or I should say, obviously, look at multiple ends of the spectrum, right? We want you to, when you hear discussion, when you hear topics, even those that are divisive, we want to encourage you to look at all aspects of things, because this makes this should help you be a more well-rounded problem solver. Really pull from those different strings and then dive into that unknown. So where Steve says, you go into this comfort space, and in college, we want you to come out of that comfort space and really delve into what could make you a better problem solver, make you more adaptable. And like Steve said, those are the types of organizations or organizations that are looking for individuals that have that drive in their flexibility, have a drive to be problem solvers, not only for their own self, right, and their own coworker environment, right, in their communication, but to propose innovative solutions for the company that they're going to work for.
Yeah, that's good. I think Samuel's question is right on. I used to work for a company. I used to be a portfolio manager in Seattle. And what you find, is that the best people, the best employees, those who get promoted to the highest levels in companies are those who can think on the spot, are those who can really think under abnormal circumstances. It's not always that things are going to be normal, but like you said, if you are a learner, if you are willing to learn, it means when you face an uncertain problem that you've not seen before, because you have problem solved, because you have learned how to learn, you can really think, given the new set of information that you have, you can think and propose a solution. And those employees are the ones that do best in companies. Those that really, when they face something they've not seen before, they can use the new information set that they have to propose a solution. And those are the people who are constantly learning. So I agree.
So Sarah has asked a question. So Matt? Sarah.
Yeah, sure. So Sarah asks, how have you maintained or built up public trust in the success, capabilities, and procedures of your institution during these times? What a great question.
Yeah, it's a very good question.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say that we need to build up the confidence that we are getting information and we're not overreacting to it. We're not underreacting to it. I think it's really important that the information you get, it's very easy for organizations. It's very easy for individuals, especially in a world of uncertainty where there's things that we haven't really seen. We don't all have a lot of experience with, pandemics. That what ends up happening is individuals can easily overreact to something, or they can underreact to something. We know from a lot of psychological studies that individuals tend to have what are referred to as behavioral biases in the way they react to information. So I think it's really important for the organization to be very careful about how it reacts to information, and for everyone in the organization to ask each other, all right, well, tell me why you're interpreting it that way. I'll tell you how I'm interpreting it. And you share information. If you share information, then the individual biases sort of go away. And so I think one of the things I want to claim about what's happened here at the University of Cincinnati is we've been very careful to be informed by all of the individuals. We've done, I think, crisis management really well. As one of the things that Michelle pointed out is communication to all the constituents. All the constituents include all of the parents and the students and the existing students, the incoming students, but also to the staff of the organization, to the faculty of the organization, to the leaders or the administrators of the organization. We keep on communicating so that they communicate with us, so that we share information, and we end up getting not a biased view of how to react, but we get a more tempered and more rational view. So I think that's one of the things that I've been very impressed with when it comes to what's happened here. I think the other thing that happens is that individuals can be sort of paralyzed by uncertainty. And so a lot of organizations just want to retreat to something that they know very well. I've been very impressed with the University of Cincinnati's ability to say, you know what, we need to learn something new. We need to do something new. We need to react to this. Let's do it in a very thoughtful way, but we can't just sit here and be still. So I think that's been very important. I think it's also the case that in terms of the medical risks, we have science that is informing us. So we have a lot of people in the medical school that are doing fundamental research in this. But in addition to that, we're not just relying upon their information. We're getting all the information from all the other academic institutions that they have their models. So I think it's quite clear that we want to gain a consensus view so that our reaction is not an underreaction and not an overreaction. I hope that helps.
Sarah, I'd like to say too, if it helps, from a faculty standpoint, we're over here waiting and we are actively participating in that communication with administration in our college and up. But we too come to a place where sometimes we have to sit and wait. And I can honestly say that it has at times been a little bit frustrating not knowing what's going on behind the scenes a little bit, what is kind of the new development on how we might move forward. But what I am really pleased to report, just like Steve said, is that when we do get the communication, it does really feel much more thought out. I feel like that all of the parties that could have been involved were involved in that process. And I know that that is why it often takes a little bit longer. You've got all of these components, all of these pieces to a puzzle that have to come together before you can present that final product. And for us, even as faculty and staff, we're kind of also in that place where we give feedback and we communicate, but we know that we have to wait for some of those responses as well. So it has posed challenges for everyone, but it's a great exercise even for us as faculty to try and exercise flexibility and patience, right? And trust, right, in our administration. And I think that you are definitely going to see that with the faculty and staff when you come to Lindner.
Yeah, one last thing I'd like to mention here is that the other thing that's been consistent with our approach here is that one size solution does not fit all. So we have tried to develop a richness of offerings to respond to the variety of needs that individuals have. So there's some people that have very specialized risk factors. We want to be very responsive to that. Other people do not have those same risk factors. I don't know if you can tell, but I'm over 60, so I have a risk factor, right? So we need to build systems that respond to the individual and listens to the individual and reacts to that. And so that's what we're doing. So if you're worried about coming here and us not paying attention to what your specific problem is because we've come up with a specific solution, that's not a solution. The solution is to listen, all right? If you're a parent and you're worried about that, our solution is to listen and to make adjustments. So one size does not fit all. So, that I think is, the main theme of tonight is we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what's going to happen with interest rates. We don't know what's going to happen with, pandemics. We don't know what's going to happen with whether the Reds are going to, win the pennant this year, right? We don't know any of that, but we do know that if you're flexible, if you're agile, if you take in information and react to it, that you're going to be much better off. And so that's true in your career. That's true for any organization. That's certainly true for the University of Cincinnati. That's our mantra.
I think that note of optimism is a fantastic way to end our panel tonight. I do want to thank our panelists for taking some time out of your Wednesday evening to share this knowledge with us. I know it was beneficial for me, and I'm sure it was for our students as well. And to our students and families that tuned in, we want to thank you for participating this night. We felt that you had some great thought-provoking questions, so thank you for those as well. Stay tuned. Hopefully you got a chance to see the slides that were rotating at the beginning that we're advertising our last session of this webinar series. So find ways to connect with that as well and join us here in a few weeks. Slightly different topic. But thank you, everybody. Stay safe, and we will see you in the fall.